do it. One just quick note about recommendation letters is generally you want recommendation letters from people who can say really substantive things about you. So a lot of the time, students think that they should get a recommendation letter from somebody who just likes them and feels positively about them, maybe somebody whose class you took and you got an A. That is a great start, but it's usually not going to be enough just because that person usually doesn't have that much to say about you. Like if you took my class and you got an A and that's the only thing I know about you, that's the only thing that I can write in a letter. I can say, so-and-so was great, they got an A in my class, period, right? If somebody has worked with me closely, developed a research project with me, I can talk about what different aspects of that research project they worked on, what exactly they did, what their contributions were, where that project went. I can describe the project itself. I just have I can write a much meatier recommendation letter than I otherwise would be able to. So the biggest kind of piece of advice I can give about who to ask for letters is people that can say a lot of substantive things about you. Yeah, okay, and with that, I'll pass that on to Harrison for the next question.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna jump in real fast because we got a very good question in the chat. This is something that I was definitely confused about when I was applying to graduate school, is about tuition. So for our graduate degree program, what we can talk about for Brown University, which we're about to transition into like Brown specific questions, is that our tuition is included in our pay. So it comes in, basically you see it like the way it works for us is it comes in and immediately gets redacted from our like pay stub, but that is not in like something that you have to pay for. So we're not like in theory losing money for this endeavor. You're gaining money. So that's like a really good question. It changes a little bit of how your taxes are done based on it counting as like income that you never see. But master's students do have to pay for their tuition. The grad PhD students are not paying for their tuition. That might not be the same across all universities, but that's how it works at Brown. So yeah, Harrison.
The next question we have is what are the differences between the three specific tracks? I'll say those one track is quite a bit different than the other ones. So linguistics is a bunch of like linguistic specific requirements. There's papers that you have to write at different points in the degree and core courses that you'll take that'll be very specific to linguistics. And that'll be different than the psych and cognitive science. You should definitely know coming in whether or not you want to do a linguistics degree or a psych/cog sci degree, and you'll be applying for very different faculty and have a very different like research background, for example. Between psych and cog sci, I gotta say there's very little daylight between these two programs. Cog sci has a small like requirement for taking like a quantitative, I think a pair of quantitative specializations, but those are often the kinds of courses you're taking anyway in your PhD, and so they end up being very similar. The great news is you don't have to choose before you come in. So once you've already started, it's very easy to switch between a psych degree and a cognitive science degree, or even, I guess, in principle, linguistics degree, although again, that'll be more determined by which lab you're in. So it doesn't really matter that much, but it's easy to switch back and forth between the two if you like. I still sometimes wonder whether or not I'm going to switch to a cog sci degree, but I probably won't. All right, Maddie's next.
Sorry, David, did you have something?
I wanted to just add to that, that also you can apply, almost any faculty can advise anybody in any program, I should say. So even if, let's say Roman's a good example, actually maybe Roman should comment on this, but he's a good example because he advises students in both the linguistics program and cognitive science program. And even students who are in linguistics could transfer over to cognitive science and do that. Really, it's about what students want to identify as. So I just wanted to make sure to also note that individual faculty can advise across the programs as well.
Okay, so our next question was in regard to what are some courses that PhD students must take. So in cognitive science and in psychology, all of us take an introductory series of 2 courses that we call core. And these 2 are designed to give you sort of a comprehensive overview. And during the course of these classes, we have professors come in every week and present on their research or their relevant topic areas. So it's also a great way to get to know all of the work that's going on in the department beyond just your specific advisor. In addition, we all also take 2 stats courses or some sort of computational stats training, but the specific course that you end up taking is going to depend based on your past experience as well as your interests in specific area of research. And then finally, we all have sort of 3 specialization courses that you work out between your graduate advisor, your research advisor, and potentially David if you have further questions. I'll toss over to Roman for the next question.
Sure. So the next question is, how are computational linguistics research in classes at Brown? So there's a couple of kind of types of answers to this. So in terms of classes, computational linguistics classes at Brown are mostly taught through the computer science department, not through CLPS, although our graduate students are very welcome to take those and often do take those if they're interested in them. Similarly, most of the research in computational linguistics at Brown these days tends to happen in computer science, although there are quite a few collaborations between faculty in computer science, faculty in CLPS, including myself. The closest class in CLPS to computational linguistics is taught by Professor Cohen Priva, who teaches information theoretic linguistics. That's, it's not exactly computational linguistics, but it's probably the closest thing. I would say maybe the short answer is if you're looking to do just straight up computational linguistics, probably we do not have enough faculty to advise you on just that. If you're looking to integrate computational linguistics with some other aspect of linguistics or some other aspect of cognitive science, then it may be a good fit depending on how closely your interests align with what particular faculty members are doing. Okay, and I guess the next question is also mine, which is, would this program support the study of language and the law or forensic linguistics? The short answer is not really, at least not any more than any other linguistics program that doesn't specialize in those things. Brown doesn't have a law school, so we don't have any direct overlap with anybody doing the legal study of language. And I don't know of any courses in our department or at Brown more broadly that focus on the intersection of language and the law. There are certainly other institutions that focus on that a lot more. And I will toss it over to Alice for the next question.
Okay, so the next question is about tutoring services. Are there any tutoring services available to graduate students? So I think the answer is yes. And grad students can take classes with undergrads, and we can also use their services. So for example, the Sheridan Center is where you can get access to such services, and you can get help with writing as well. And I think Haley here has had tutoring for like an applied math class, for example.
Yeah, and then we also are like affiliated with the Carney Institute for Brain Sciences. And so there are people there who are basically hired to be consultants for doing computational analyses or statistical analyses that you might feel a little bit intimidated by, and they're experts whose job it is to help walk you through some difficult analyses that you might not know how to do. And so there are lots of resources available for different kinds of mentorship on a variety of different fronts.
I think the next question goes to Harrison.
Oh yeah, so the question is, what access are there to facilities such as MRI scanner, EEG, ECG, hospital and patients? And so I do some of that work. I say a lot of my work's been behavioral, but I do a fair bit of cognitive neuroscience as well. We've got great access to a world-class, state-of-the-art EEG fMRI system, so we can do simultaneous EEG and fMRI. I think Haley's doing a bit of that as well. Yeah, and so we have a great system, and because Brown's a little smaller and there's not a huge number of cognitive neuroscience faculty, there's usually pretty great access to the scanner where you can book, 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks out. So great resources for getting access to fMRI and knowledgeable faculty for talking through this. So we also have a dedicated EEG system. I think there's a TMS somewhere in the department, but I'm not sure. For hospitals, there are some collaborations. We've got someone in our lab, a postdoc in our lab, who works for the VA, doing deep brain stimulation experiments, and often certain faculty will have collaborations abroad. And so I've got or further abroad. I've got collaborations down at Baylor with people doing ECOG and deep brain stimulation in depression cohorts. And, there's often collaborations all over the place because, Brown's a world-class institution and people want to come and work with us and share the cool data they have on those kinds of more rare cognitive neuroscience opportunities. Okay, so I'll pass it on to David next.
Right. So how easy is it for students from different labs or even different fields to talk and discuss? Well, this is something that I think Brown does exceptionally well. I mean, we work in Brown's general style is recognizes that discovery often happens at the boundaries between fields, right? That often we end up with interesting, we take ideas, we apply ideas, I should say, often developed in other areas, we apply them in new ways to our field and we learn new things. And often doing that kind of work, right, especially if you're interested in the mind, you're just in brain, you're interested in language, these are inherently interdisciplinary topics. And so we benefit from having colleagues who have worked in those areas because we can't be experts ourselves in everything. That's just something you learn, right? And so really cultivating an environment where you can have those kind of discussions is important. And so we do that. We have both informally as well as formal ways of encouraging interaction among different groups of students, different labs, and even different departments. We have, for instance, at the smallest level, lab meetings are often attended across multiple different labs. For instance, in our lab is an open lab meeting, and we have people who attend from multiple different areas. We have training grants. For instance, we have something called the ICON training grant, which is explicitly meant to train students across 6 different units at Brown, from these 6 different departments: neuroscience, applied math, public health, computer science, our department, and others. And so it's really, and that's just a couple examples. There are many more. There are journal clubs, there are seed grants, there's all kinds of ways to encourage those interactions. And so that's a big part, I think, of it makes us who we are at Brown, and it's something I think is really exciting. It's an exciting place to be if you're interested in these kinds of topics. Next question is, what efforts is Brown's Cognitive Linguistic and Psychological Sciences Department taking to increase its diversity? That's an excellent question. We've been focused on this, and we have a lot of work still to do. We've taken a number of steps in the last few years, ranging at multiple levels. So we've done things like review our admissions criteria and review, and to find ways that we can be more holistic in our admissions. We've participated in national conferences that are focused on STEM education in underrepresented groups. We are focused in outreach, both in the Providence area as well as broadly in the education of STEM. We've been doing a bunch of different activities to try to gain through partnerships. We have a training grant here called the Imsd Grant, which is meant to support science education in underrepresented groups. And through them, they have built a network of universities, including universities that serve underrepresented communities, that we've been able to start communicating with and trying to engage in outreach with those groups. And then diversity is one part of it. The other piece of it is at Brown is inclusion. So once we diversify our graduate body, we also have to have a community that can, where different people who come from different backgrounds can interact and learn. And we've been working as well with our departmental culture. We have a very active, what we call a DIAP, diversity and inclusion group. We have a very, very active DIAP committee with lots of graduate student involvement, as well as faculty and undergraduate and staff involvement in that group that considers all aspects of what we're doing. And so I think that's also helped us to have an ongoing conversation about this, but we still have a lot of work to do, but it's something that we're very excited about that challenge. And I think we continue to grow. I don't know, Haley is the DIAP representative from the graduate students. Do you have anything to add to what I just said?
Yeah, I think we have been working on things, but it's definitely very much still an ongoing process. And a lot of the effort there comes from the grad students. And so it's been really cool to have a group of people who are all interested in, hopefully making CLPS a better place and working together on initiatives that they're interested in. It's a lot of, just what am I trying to say? There's a lot of like really cool teamwork that goes on in that committee. And it's a lot of ideas that different students have and then working together to try to implement them and try things out and see what works. And I think a lot of the people on this panel are all members of the DIAP committee. And, there's just a lot of community buy-in to the DIAP, it has been a really cool process to see the different things that different labs, different levels of members. So for example, graduate students, faculty, lab managers, like administrators, what everyone brings to that group has been really cool. So I will throw it over to Roman.
Oh, I have one more question.
Oh, darn it. Okay, David.
So we were asked, can I apply for co-mentorship even if one of the faculty is not taking a student? So one thing I should say is that you're admitted to our program, right? But you have to identify a research advisor. So I think what's implicit in this question is it's always a good idea to reach out to potential advisors and ask them if they're planning to advise students. And the reason is because faculty very often will have, they may have a large number of students in their lab at a given time. They're not really in a place to advise a student and so forth. And so you should always check before applying. But it is the case that our department allows for co-mentorship, where you have multiple advisors working with a student. In fact, we could ask Harrison, because he's had this experience, a little bit about what that's been like. And that's something that very often faculty will co-mentor if for instance, they don't feel like could take on advise a student all on their own, they might be willing to co-mentor, and that can often be a possibility. And you would just indicate that with your personal statement that you had that as an interest when you applied. And maybe Harrison wanted to say a few words just about co-mentorship.
My experience, that's been really great. I'm sure David said you'll have a primary supervisor when you come, but it's great to get the chance to kind of work closely across multiple labs. It can end up being, that's something you want to talk with both supervisors like explicitly about, to see if there's kind of carve out what that overlap's going to look like and why you think that fit's going to be right for the kind of research program you want to do. But yeah, it's been incredibly rewarding, and I just absolutely love the opportunity to kind of work with multiple people, and my supervisors have just made this just an awesome experience.
And I should also say that at every level, I think something also realize that at each stage of your graduate training, there'll be a broader committee of faculty who are involved at who also advise on what you're doing, and there's just the broader department, and we have a very interactive faculty. So there's an opportunity to be trained by multiple faculty and have lots of people have input on your research throughout your graduate training too, even beyond your advisor.
And I can even throw in that there's opportunities to be advised by people even outside of Brown if you're still interested in that. So for example, I'm currently working on my prelim, and one of the members of my committee is someone who works at the University of Oregon, because it seemed like he would be a good person to have as an addition, and that's something that's very open to you at Brown, which is very cool. So now I'll officially throw it to Roman.
Okay, so the next question is, oh geez, I just lost my thought. Okay, there it is. How imperative is it to contact professors from Brown University if you want to apply here? It is absolutely not required. I've personally admitted students who never emailed me before and who I never heard from until the admissions process. It is a good idea. It's a good idea for a couple of reasons. So David already mentioned this, but one reason it's a really good idea is just to find out if that person is even taking a student. If there's, one main person that you want to work with in our department, and it turns out that that person is not taking students that year, then probably you might not want to apply, or you might want to apply and, indicate that you want to work with someone else. Well, I'll mention this a little bit later, but it is generally a very good idea. I would say very important to indicate that you want to work with someone who actually is taking students. If you indicate that you want to work with someone who is not taking students, then odds are pretty good that your application could fall through the cracks. Anyway, we'll get into that. There's a question coming up that we'll get into that a little bit more. It also is just a good idea to open lines of communication with that professor. Just basically to put yourself on their radar. That won't necessarily guarantee success. So if you're if the kind of work that you're interested in doing isn't actually relevant to that professor's current work or their interests, then just reaching out and saying, I'm so-and-so and here's what I want to work on won't, necessarily get you admitted or help you get admitted if it's really not what that person does. But if it is what that person does, and it's, it sounds like, you might be a good fit for their lab, then it can help them sort of mentally flag you for when they see your application later. It'll be like, oh, that's that person that I talked to. We're all sort of social creatures who are affected by familiarity and who we already know. So if we already feel like we know you, we might pay a little bit extra attention. There's a blog post from Steve Luck, who is a professor at UC Davis, with some, I think, really good advice on how to email faculty. I'm just going to drop a link to that into the chat now. He gives kind of more detailed advice on this point. Okay, so I'll toss it back to David about the GRE.
And so we had a few questions about the GRE that were related to whether we want it, even though it's not required. So the first thing I'll say is we made the decision last year, and we're doing this again this year, is that we are no longer accepting the GRE in admissions. And so we do not accept it even as an optionally. So it's not only not a requirement, we just don't accept it. You don't need to send us the GRE. And if you do, we won't see it.
Okay, I think I'm next again. So somebody was asking, how much weight do professors, I guess, how much influence do professors have in deciding which students to take, or is it more of a decision of the entire department or of a graduate admission committee? The short answer is that it's some of both. So we want to make sure that if you come here, there's at least one person who would be a good direct advisor for you. Ideally, there should be more than one, but there should be at least one. So it would really help to indicate who that person would be on your application. And again, to make sure that that person is accepting students if you can contact them in advance. This is why I said before, if you indicate somebody who's not taking students, and let's say you don't indicate anyone else, unless your application happens to really stand out to someone who is currently taking students, there's some chance that your application just won't get looked at in as much detail, because if that one person says, well, I'm not taking anyone this year, and they're the only person you've indicated, maybe no one else will even look at it. So it's a really good idea to make sure that there is at least one person who you want to work with who is taking students. It's also a really good idea to make sure that there's more than one, if at all possible. Partly, it's because the ultimate decision does get made by a group of people, not just one person on our end. And partly it's because we want to ensure a really good mentoring experience. All sorts of things can happen. If you come to our program and the one person that you wanted to work with leaves, or something happens where your interests change and you decide actually you don't want to work on that thing anymore, you want to work on something else. For whatever reason, if you want to switch advisors, you want to make sure that there's somebody for you, somebody else who you would be able to work with. So in general, we try to make sure that that's the case in our admissions. So it really helps to indicate a couple of people. And ultimately, the decision gets made by the entire department. But if there's a particular person who a particular applicant who a particular advisor really wants to work with, then they do have a lot of influence over the process. They can really indicate, I'm really excited about so-and-so's application. So it's, the short answer is it's a bit of a mix of both.
If I could just jump in, I just want to clarify one quick point. That everything Roman said is very good advice. I think we do, though, as part of our application process, every application is read by, regardless of whether you indicate faculty or that faculty is taking a student or not. And it is the case that, even as Roman said earlier, he's taken students, for instance, who didn't contact him, right? And it is the case that even we've had cases where we read an application, we say, they mentioned a faculty member who's in one case wasn't even in our department, but their interest clearly did match some faculty, and so we do try to put that around. So importantly, I think it is important, in addition to finding faculty that you want to work with, that you're also clear about sort of what your goals are for graduate study, and that comes across to us, because that helps us also decide about a match to the program. So that's why I just wanted to add that bit of clarity.
So I think Alice is next.
Yeah, so I think now we're moving into the section of discussion where we're just giving general advice. And so the first thing that we've got here is tips and suggestions on applications, personal statements. So Alice will talk a little bit about that in a second. The third thing on the list was studying for the GRE. Well, as David mentioned, we are not accepting the GRE. And so, you don't have to really worry about that for the purpose of this graduate program. But you might be applying to other graduate programs that do require the GRE. And so I just want to say a few words about how you can prep for that. So the secret is that the GRE, of course, doesn't test your ability to think critically per se, or to be able to be really good at math, even though these are like sections on the GRE. Instead, there are specific sort of problems that they're trying to get you to solve. And just by way of example, my own GRE math score was not great because I don't think about those kinds of math problems in my day-to-day, even though my research program is literally all like computational models of like decision-making and of learning. And so this is all to say, there's actually, for better or for worse, not much of a correspondence between how good you are at something and how well you would perform it on that thing on the GRE. So start early, invest in a good prep book. It always sucks to have to spend money on these things, but if you invest in a good preparatory book, this costs you like something like $20. You work through the style of problems that they expect you to be able to solve on the GRE, and then if you are able to work on that for a course of like, let's say 3 months in advance, then I think you would find yourself much more well prepared to take the test well. So with that out of the way, Alice will talk to you about all the much more interesting stuff.
Okay, so yeah, I'll say a few things about the personal statement, which is typically required at probably every program. So I think my experience has been that you get to a good personal statement after many rounds of revisions, and I think that if that opinion has been echoed elsewhere for this kind of writing project in general. So I think the main thing is to give yourself enough time to go through those rounds of revisions, and to give people whose advice you'd want also enough time to give you that feedback. Yeah, and then I also think that it's kind of a hierarchical process, because you can't really start on the writing or like formulating your research interests until you kind of narrow down your programs of interest and your PIs of interest. So those are kind of like the first things to get out of the way. And then in terms of the actual writing process, what I found helpful for me was to, just to go with some kind of structure that obviously will vary depending on the actual prompt, and also other factors like the word limit, or like word count limit, or I don't know, page limit, things like that. But generally, I feel like the personal statement has a few broad elements, which are, you want to start with an introduction of your research interests and a big picture question that you might want to tackle in grad school. And then what I like to do next is to talk about why I want to work with so-and-so in the department. This obviously can include more than just one person, more than the PI you want to directly apply to work with. Then I think a lot of the space should be dedicated to talking about your research experience, because I think it's a chance for you to demonstrate the skills you've picked up, and kind of talk about how you reason through problems. It's sort of a chance for you to shine, whereas in other parts of the application, you're kind of just, ticking boxes. And then lastly, I think you also want to mention your future goals, what you plan on doing with your degree, whether that's going into academia or doing something that's not in academia. So yeah, I would say those are the 4 major components of a personal statement. And I don't know if other people have anything else to add to that, but yeah.
Maybe we'll jump in just a little bit. So when I first started writing personal statements, I was thinking about the kind of personal statements that you'd write for like a college undergrad application, where it's like, this is who I am as an individual. And that's a little bit less of what the personal statement is for grad school. It helped me to reframe my thinking about the personal statement as a research statement. Who am I in terms of the kinds of research I want to pursue? What's my research identity? A little bit less focus on my personal identity. And so I think this tends to be something like, for me, it's something that I made a mistake in writing the first couple of drafts, as if it were like a personal statement rather than a research statement.
Yeah, that can also get kind of confusing because some programs will have two statements where one of them really is more of a personal statement that's about your personal experiences and your background. But the one that seems to be required for most programs is the research statement, which will sometimes be called the personal statement.
I'm going to jump in ahead of Roman because this is a good question, and maybe Roman and David can answer this in the chat. Does a writing sample have to be an essay or a thesis, or could you maybe submit a poster? I don't know the answer to that question.
I don't know the answer to that question either. I don't think in practice I've ever seen anyone submit a poster.
I haven't seen that either. I mean, I do think there's a, I think it would be really cool to see a poster. I do think that one of the goals of the writing sample, though, is to get a sense of an applicant's, how they express themselves in writing, and to get a sense of their thought process, which often requires that, you know, a bit of a more writing than you would usually do in a poster. So there might be a risk associated with submitting a poster for that reason. That being said, I mean, I think it would certainly be interesting work. So my advice would be probably to stick with a writing sample, like something that you've written, that's original writing that really communicates the way you think and the way you communicate as much as possible. And that would probably be the strongest thing to do. There's lots of opportunities to do things like show us a good poster, though, because we have an interview process and everything that goes beyond once we start narrowing down our applicants, and very often there's all kinds of opportunity to see research and talk about research you've done in the form of a poster and other forms.
One other thing I'll just add to that is I think it's important that the writing sample be just your writing. So sometimes undergraduate students who are applying have, you know, a publication that they've co-authored with an undergraduate mentor. That's fantastic. That's, you know, a great thing to put on your CV. But that doesn't give us as clear an idea of just your own writing if it's something that was co-written with someone else. So ideally, I think the most informative writing samples are those that are just your own work. And I guess I'm also next. So the question is, what do you need to be a strong candidate for a PhD in cognitive science and linguistics and psychology if your major is in a different field coming out of undergrad? I would say that the most important thing is that you have a sort of well-developed set of research interests. And it's basically that it's clear what you want to do in graduate school, or what kinds of things broadly you want to do, what you want to work on, and that you have the skills to do those things. So for example, if your undergraduate degree is in computer science, but it's very clear how the skills that you develop during that degree would be relevant to doing the kind of research that you want to do as a graduate student, then that's great. It doesn't matter that it's not in psychology or in linguistics or whatever. If you have a big kind of, like if it's not obvious what the relationship is between your undergraduate degree and the program that you're applying to for graduate school, that's okay. Just make it clear, right? Like if you have an undergraduate degree in physics and you're applying to a graduate program in psychology, there's some reason why you're doing that, right? And so you just need to say what that reason is. Like, what is it that made you decide to switch over from physics to psychology? That's exactly what your personal statement or statement of purpose, or, you know, whatever it's called. That's exactly what that document is for, is to explain your research interests and what motivates them. I also, just related to this question, I wanted to just basically add to and endorse what Alice was saying before. It is a really, really common pitfall. I would say like 90% of the statements that I get are written like undergraduate personal statements. You know, they're basically about who you are and what your autobiographical journey and story is, and how you got to the point of applying to this graduate program. That's fantastic. I learn a lot about a lot of interesting people, but it is not the kind of thing that we are looking for in graduate admissions, or I think that other departments are looking for in graduate admissions. When I'm reading a statement of purpose from prospective students, what I really want to understand is, what do you want to work on? And also, secondary to that, do you have the skills that you would need to be able to work on that? Some skills, you know, I think that I can train you on. That's part of what graduate school is for. You don't have to have all of the skills that you need. But the more of those you have, the better the evidence is that you kind of know what you're getting into, and that you're prepared to work on that thing. And so this applies whether you're coming from a different field or not, right? If you have a really well-motivated set of research questions, that is the important thing to highlight in your statement of purpose. How exactly you got there, or what was the path by which you arrived to have those questions, that's less important. And just like Alice and Jay were saying, I did the exact same thing. The first draft I wrote of my statement was, it was just the wrong kind of thing. Like, I wrote an autobiographical narrative about who I am. And thankfully, instead of submitting it, I showed it to a mentor who said, don't submit this, rewrite it from scratch. This is the wrong kind of document. Write about what you want to work on, what you think the interesting questions you want to solve are. And I did that, and it works much, much better. So again, related to something Alice said, is if you have a chance, please show your statement to somebody else, somebody more senior than you, somebody who's already been through graduate school, or at least has been admitted to graduate school, and get their advice. It's really, really invaluable to go through a couple of rounds of revisions like that, if you can.
And that actually segues really well into the next kind of group of questions. And these are a lot of ones I've been getting in the chat as well, which is what are kind of like the benefits and drawbacks of going into graduate school straight out of undergraduate? Do you have a better chance if you have a master's? Kind of how do you get, and I guess segueing into some other things. One of the definite drawbacks, and I think this is something that I fell into because I came in right out of undergraduate, was I definitely, like, my first draft also was like that. And one of my final drafts was probably much closer to that than it should have been, because that was my only experience, and I hadn't really seen what other people would have been submitting. So that's definitely a drawback. I think this answer has like lots and lots and lots of answers in terms of how much research experience do you have? A really good way, and something that someone asked, is how can you get research experience, especially if maybe your undergraduate institution didn't offer that, it wasn't a research institution. A really great thing that a lot of people do if they're interested in research but don't know if they're really ready to apply yet, and they don't know if they want to do a master's, is to get a job as a research coordinator or as a lab manager for a lab that they're interested in applying to. And I might throw it over to the Feldman Hall Lab group to chat about this for a second, because this is not something that or Maddie, I guess. But people often, let's say you're interested in grad school, you don't really feel like your application's ready yet. How do I bridge that gap? Becoming a lab manager and being able to work full-time in a lab. You're not taking classes necessarily, but you're not like spending money to do more school. But you are able to live that life of, I'm doing research all day. I might be doing other types of tasks. But for example, like my lab manager right now, in David and I's lab, like comes to the MRI research facility with me every morning from 7 to 10 a.m. and gets to experience what is it like if she was to be a grad school student after that, gets to do all of those exciting parts of it. So that's like a really good way to, if you're interested in that. And those jobs typically will come out in the spring. I would say in general, is when people will start looking for that. And so that's something that you can look for on different websites, and what Roman has just posted, which is awesome. That's a really great way to get that experience. And I think that's, experience is basically the biggest benefit drawback of starting right out of undergrad. The other thing with experience too is just, do you know if this is the exact type of research that you want to do for 5 years of your career? I think probably the percentage of people who ends up switching projects or labs, if they come straight out of undergrad, my guess is it would probably be higher. I have no statistics to back that up. But your research just you haven't had the time to really just spend your full time thinking about, an intellectual problem, because you don't have that opportunity just going through an undergrad degree, no matter how much research experience you've had. You don't have that same type of intellectual time. And I think the third thing that I was going to mention about a drawback to coming straight out of an undergraduate is definitely just related to the essay, is treating it the application process, the same way that you treated an undergraduate application process. They're really not the same. And that's something that is kind of hard to glean, because it's like, well, this is just more school. I'm just applying to this, the same way that I applied to other schools. It's really not the same type of a process, because this is really more of a one-on-one mentorship. And that's something that can be hard to know, because where do you find out that information unless you know other people who are going through this process? So the next question that we're all going to answer really quickly is how many schools we looked at and maybe applied to. I know when I was looking at it, I was very much thinking it's like, oh, this is just like an undergrad. So I'm going to look at like, what's a campus I like, and who has, you know, the most computers, because I want computer resources. And when I should have really initially been looking at like, okay, where are faculty that I'm interested in? And luckily I had really great mentors at my undergrad that were like, Haley, no, you should look at things this other way. And I got to work with an amazing mentor here. So I looked at, I think initially I was looking at like 20 schools where I was like, these would all work great. And then eventually narrowed it much down, I think, to closer to like maybe 3 or 4 that I seriously looked at. Yeah, I'll throw it to Harrison next.
Yeah, I had a pretty short list. I looked at 3 spots because I had a really clear idea of what I wanted to work on, and I wanted to be sure that anywhere that I applied to was somewhere that I was really serious in going.
Okay, and then I'm going to throw it to Maddie next, but before I do that, I'll also say another thing too is with undergrad applications, this is something that you'll realize is if you're like, I can just treat this like an undergrad application, I can submit to 20 schools and just have it work. Like the quality of your application will be directly inversely proportional to how well you're able to tailor it to a faculty. And so it's just not really advisable to try to do like, you know, just a bunch of applications, because what you'll end up doing is writing one letter that really only fits for one school. And then you just like, you know, change a couple of words in there, here and there. And that's really not a good way to get into graduate school, and not a good way that, you know, you should be thinking about what your research interest is in. Yeah, so Maddie.
Yeah, I would also like to wholeheartedly advise the lab manager idea. I was very involved with research in my undergrad, but wanted to really be sure before I committed myself to this. And so I worked as a lab manager for a year. It was exceptionally helpful, both in preparing me for graduate school, a lot of the skills that you gain in, you know, managing lots of different research projects, managing research assistants, actually getting to, you know, have time in your day to think about research questions was all very helpful. Because of that, I also had a very good idea of what I wanted to do. And there are not a lot of people who study what I study. So just like Harrison, I applied for 3 schools. I'll toss it over to the Feldman Hall group.
Yeah, so I was interested in about 15 to 20 programs, which I definitely had to narrow down. Because I was interested, I mean, I still am interested in both social neuroscience and memory and decision-making. So I mean, the process of narrowing it down to the 9 programs that I actually applied to, which I think is kind of like, still is more typical these days, maybe 7 to 9. It's kind of like people who were applying around the same time I was, that was how many programs they were applying to as well. But yeah, the process of narrowing it down to the programs I actually applied to, you know, is a combination of which PIs were actually taking students in the programs that I was interested in, and also where I wanted to live. So that's a personal factor. I didn't want to move to somewhere and spend 5 years in a place I didn't want to live in. So yeah.
Yeah, I started by just reading a lot of, you know, or thinking about the people whose papers I really enjoyed reading in the last couple of years. Came up with a dozen names, emailed people, see who was taking students. That narrowed it down to like, you know, 8 programs. Applied to all 8. In retrospect, I probably should have, you know, applied to a little bit fewer number of schools, but I think 8 tends to be a safe number for a lot of people. Also highly endorse, you know, taking some years working as a lab tech, lab manager, full-time research assistant, lab coordinator. I did that even though I had pretty extensive research experience in undergrad, and it just, yeah, it reinforced my conviction that grad school was right for me and that research is something I want to do.
All right, David, I'm going to throw it to you for the last question.
All right, let's see. So how do I know if this program is a fit for me? This is a great question, because that's really important. We often think about graduate applications as us evaluating the applicants, but really the whole application process, basically after that first, you send us, actually even before, as everybody here has stated, you start by evaluating programs, right? You start like looking who's there, what faculty, you email them, are they interested, what do you want to do? Right. And then basically after that, if you look across our application process, we receive applications, we narrow that down to a set of interviews that we do typically online. And then we narrow that down further to a set of interviews that are done on campus before we make our final decisions. At every step of the way, yes, we're interviewing the candidates, but they're also interviewing us to some degree, right? They're talking to us about things. They're looking at the program, and you should be doing that all the way. You should be asking, trying to look at the track record of the people you want to work with, right? How many students have they trained? Where are those students now, right? If you can talk to students, right? Most programs, our program will do this. When we do our interviews, we will have you hang out with the graduate students and talk to the students in the program and ask them questions about what it's like to be part of the program. What's it like to work with Professor so-and-so? All of those things are really important for making your decision about where to go, because there's a 5-year, most programs are about 5 years. It's a pretty big commitment. And it's really important that you find a program that fits you. Alice mentioned, for some people, where you live is really important. So you want to get a sense of where is it located, right? What are the students like, right? What's the what other kinds of opportunities are there, and what kind of a community are they creating there? And all of that's really important. So you need to be evaluating the programs all the way as well, and that's really important for success in graduate school, because getting in is just the first part, right? There's a whole bunch of things that happen after that. And so that's really becomes really important to go through that, make that a two-way process.
Well, great. Thank you so much to all of you who came, and the really great questions in the chat and the ones that you submitted beforehand. We really appreciate it. We'll try to send out, if we didn't get to a question that you submitted to us on the Qualtrics, we're really sorry. We tried to get to as many as we could today, cover a wide variety, but there definitely were a couple. So we'll try to send a follow-up with both the recording of this video, which I started like a couple minutes late by accident, but got most of it. And hopefully, I think the transcript of this will save, and then we'll maybe follow up with a couple of questions that I got in the chat that we didn't have time to answer, as well as ones we had on the Qualtrics form. But thank you all very much. Definitely, please check out the links that are in the chat. And also, if you type in Brown CLPS or use any of the links that were sent to you when you signed up for this, you can learn more about us on our website. And we were really excited to get to talk with all of you today. Have a great evening / whatever time zone you're in rest of your day.